Colleagues, I would like to greet you all. Good afternoon to everyone and welcome to today's webinar, which is hosted by the Academy of Science of South Africa, specifically from its forum on water and sanitation. My name is Melusi Twala. I've got the privilege of facilitating today's discussion. I am from the Academy of Science of South Africa, and today we are actually engaging on an aspect related to water security, which from a South African context is central to socio-economic development as outlined in our national development plan. And through legal means, specifically the Water Services Act, we've legalized and afforded the right of citizens to access basic and water and sanitation services, which is then the responsibility of water services authorities to provide such a service in a manner that is efficient, equitable, affordable, as well as sustainable. However, we know due to our history as South Africa that deep inequalities were actually formulated and they persist today. This also cascades into water and sanitation services. This is something that is actually acknowledged in our national water and sanitation master plan. But we also appreciate that due to these inequalities, we face high poverty and unemployment, which roughly stands at around 44%. And this poses a question to water services authorities. How can water service authorities deliver an equitable service when many of their households are actually poor and face a high stage of unemployment? And what social goals and financing models do they actually infuse when they set the tariffs to charge the citizens? So whilst we appreciate our local context, we'll also be reflecting on an international perspective, drawing from the UK. We've got Alex Ford who will be speaking to us from the UK, just to get how they've actually looked at this situation. ASSAf's role is to bring science into the forefront of national importance issues by providing evidence-informed solutions. And really this webinar is part of that effort. And we have got an excellent lineup of speakers who will share insights from different perspectives. And today, to actually kickstart, I would like to welcome Professor Eugene Klute, who is the member of the Forum on Water and Sanitation. Forum of ASSAf is an ASSAf member, but I think on a daily basis, he's the CEO of the Cape Higher Education Consortium. In relevance to today's discussion, Professor Klute is a world-renowned microbiologist who's had decades of work, research with regards to water quality, water services, and water security. Prof, over to you for the opening remarks, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Twala, and good afternoon, colleagues. It is a pleasure for me to say a few words as we start today's seminar on municipal water and sanitation services. Why should we pay? Can we afford to pay? Now, we gather at a time where South Africa faces urgent and complex challenges in ensuring safe, reliable, and sustainable access to water and sanitation. These challenges go to the heart of our country's development, touching on equity, poverty, municipal finance, and the very dignity of our communities. Today's discussion will allow us to engage openly with key questions. How do we sustain our water systems under financial strain? How do we balance affordability for households with the need for municipalities to remain financially viable? And importantly, what practical strategies can move us closer to universal, equitable access? I would like to thank our partners, our speakers, and delegates for contributing their expertise, perspectives, and lived experiences in this dialogue. Your voices are vital in shaping solutions that are not only technically sound, but socially just. Let us use this platform, this webinar this afternoon, to listen, to challenge one another constructively, and to leave here with ideas that we can take forward together, forward a future where water and sanitation services are secure, equitable, and sustainable for all. The webinar offers an opportunity to bridge evidence, policy, and practice on one of South Africa's most urgent service delivery challenges. Its impact will be greatest if outcomes can move beyond discussion toward concrete policy recommendations, follow-up dialogues, or a roadmap for municipal reform. Thank you and a warm welcome, and I'm looking forward to the presentations to follow. Back to you.
Thank you, Prof, for giving that appetizer, kickstarting our engagement today. I would now like to welcome to the platform Mr. ASSAf from the city of Tshwane, which is my home municipality, being based in Pretoria. He serves as the acting group head of Water and Sanitation business unit at the Metro, whereby he oversees the planning policy perspectives as well regarding water and sanitation. ASSAf has worked immensely both in the private and public sector, focusing on issues regarding affordability of water and sanitation services, as well as infrastructure maintenance. And thank you for coming through, ASSAf. We look forward to your insights. Over to you.
And good afternoon to the members in the platform and the audience. Yes, my name is ASSAf. So as indicated, I'm currently working for the city of Tshwane as a acting group head, but my position, I'm actually a divisional head responsible for water and wastewater within the city of Tshwane. So it's an honor, I think, to have been recognized to come and just have a chat and have a dialogue, with colleagues, peers in the industry. And so today I'll be taking you through a municipal perspective in as far as water security is concerned, or the sustainability in terms of municipal financing within South Africa. So it will focus on the legal perspective, the financial, and obviously the social perspective. Being mindful of time, and also if the chairperson allows, if maybe I can switch off the camera so that I'm able to move swiftly, with the presentation.
That is fine. That is fine.
All right, thank you. All right, in terms of the contents of what we'll be discussing, so we'll look at the legal framework as I've indicated, and just on high level, what are the factors that are affecting water security and what are we currently doing? And the financing mechanism for municipalities will also then look at the cost of service. What does it cost for us to provide services? And then the legal requirements. Why should consumers pay for the service that they are getting? And if they are not paying, what then are the implications? And then also approaches that we can or that we are implementing in order to encourage the citizens to pay. And then I'll conclude my presentation. The presentation, although I've mentioned that I'm from the city of Tshwane, is not entirely for the city of Tshwane, but giving a municipal perspective. In terms of the legal framework, Chairperson, when you've opened, you've mentioned quite a number of acts that govern the water and sanitation. The biggest one being obviously the Constitution, which indicates Section 27 of the Constitution says everybody's got a right of access to sufficient water. And in that, Section 152 then indicates that municipalities must provide sustainable services, and one of those services is water. What guides us more is the Water Services Act of 1997, which indicates that municipalities are regarded as what we call a water services authority, and they are then exercising authority over the jurisdiction within the boundaries of the municipality to make sure that they provide water within the jurisdiction. Then there are other requirements such as your water services development plan that we need to put together, and then also set standards in terms of provision of services, how you're supposed to provide services, what kind of services you're supposed to provide, and so forth. And then we also have the Municipal Systems Act, which sort of guides the municipalities in terms of how do you set your tariffs, how do you make sure that the service that you are giving are equitable, they are also efficient, but are also affordable. And one of the ways that we're doing that, which allows that, we are able to make sure that we give the equitable and efficient is through management of tariffs and also credit control, which is another way of managing, the services that we have. The last one, which is also crucial, is the Municipal Finance and Management Act, which then requires municipality to ensure that, sound financial governance and accountability. These are not, the only legal requirements. There are others. However, for the purpose of this presentation, those then form the core of what guides us in water and sanitation. What are the factors really that are affecting water security? From a global perspective, there's quite a number of factors that are affecting water security. You would know that urbanization, you are aware, I think in the news, even sometime in the week, they were talking about issues around mushrooming of informal settlement, which talks to urbanization, the issues of population. Now, the impact of that becomes the increase in terms of water demand, also then it strains, your water infrastructure. Then there is issues of climate change, talking about drought, floods. We've been getting unstable rainfalls, or some of them almost unpredicted. You would know that the likes of the Devon and your Eastern Cape, part of that, have been getting some really abnormal rainfalls. One of the issues that also affects the water security is the pollution, water quality degradation. In terms of the current water quality, if you look at most of our water sources, they are polluted either from industrial or agricultural, or maybe even domestic, sometimes even stormwater or surface runoff, which then pollute, our water quality. And as a result, because you are abstracting from the same source, so that then threatens the water quality or the water security. Then we also have issues of infrastructure challenges. These are aging or poorly maintained networks. So if you're not maintaining, you would know that currently most of the municipalities are sitting well above 35% in as far as water is concerned. High water losses as a result of aging or poorly maintained or managed. Then you also get financial constraints because in the absence of finance, then you are then unable to maintain your infrastructure. You are then unable to expand and allow for developments to come. Issues of governance and institutional capacity, where you find that the planning, spatial planning, is not in place or is not well coordinated. And of importance of what we've been seeing, the enforcement of bylaws, within respective municipalities. Other factors are social or behavioral factors, which talks to the illegal connections, solely just wastage and non-compliance in as far as payments are concerned. Mitigation in terms of the strategies that are currently, look at in terms of population and urbanization, the planning must be of, precise in terms of making sure that you plan for, short-term, medium-term, and also long-term in as far as infrastructure is concerned. The spatial planning indicating where you're going to get development, but also managing, the current demand that we currently are having. And in terms of climate change, you'll see the water conservation and water demand features quite a bit, which is what most of the municipalities are actually battling with. Hence, you will see the high, non-revenue water that municipalities are currently experiencing. And then the issues of pollution, look at enforcement and regulation and technology as far as wastewater treatment is concerned, and also of importance, community awareness and education, so that, water courses that we have, we can't produce any more water courses, but we have to look after what we have. Then with regards to infrastructure, regular maintenance, this talks to your planned maintenance and obviously your future expansion in as far as your network is concerned. Smart network, where we're looking at monitoring of your network and making sure that you are then able to respond quicker to any service delivery challenges, either being water leaks, pipe bursts, or whatever the case might be. So then you are able to see or to monitor your network as you supposed to. Then a reduction in terms of non-revenue water. There are programs that you can run to reduce non-revenue water. Your leak fixing and your leak fixing, your pressure management, and so forth. And then in terms of the finance, then making sure that you've got cost-reflective tariffs, which will then encourage people in terms of paying for their services, as opposed to stealing water, and also strengthening revenue collection, your credit control measures, and making sure that that is strengthened. Also, there's been a buzzword in the past couple of years, from the past 10 years, exploring utilization of triple Ps, which are public-private partnerships in terms of finance. Reason being, with low collections, you then tend to want to look at other avenues that you can raise funds, fund your digital expansion, and also your maintenance. Then in terms of governance, the building institutional capacity, making sure that those are replaced. You're bringing in newer technology, guys with newer ideas, as and when the older guys are actually exiting the system. Then also making sure that we have policies that are transparent. Social behavior, community engagement. I believe in public space, community engagement is very important. It's a make or break in terms of work that you do, but also enforcement in as far as bylaws are concerned, and also looking at tariffs that will allow for incentives in cases where citizens are going an extra mile in terms of making sure that water is secure. The financing mechanism, I won't dwell much into it, but the core of the financing for municipalities, all right? The core is tariff, revenue, so that goes towards your planning and maintenance. And there is also national equitable share, which are grants that are normally given by National Treasury. And then you get conditional grants, such as your municipal infrastructure grants. These ones are normally for smaller municipalities. Then you get your USDG or ISUPG, which are then usually given to the metros. And then There's loans and bonds, which you, based on your financial position, you can be able to go out to the market. I've mentioned the issue of public-private partnerships. Then in terms of cost for service provision, so 4 issues which are critical that we look at when we're setting up tariffs, or tariffs which are a means of recovering a cost in order to provide a specific service. We're looking at operational and maintenance cost, and then bulk purchases. This will then depend on, if you don't have your own internal sources, you will then use bulk services such as your water boards. And then the capital cost, this is capital cost in as far as your new infrastructure and infrastructure expansion is concerned. And then non-revenue water, which I've indicated that many of the municipalities, what we are buying or what we are producing, we're losing the average of around 30 to 40, even higher, in terms of non-revenue water. Legal requirements for citizens to pay. I've mentioned quite a few already in my opening statement. You will see that the Constitution also plays that role, that we are, as municipalities, allowed to charge and recover fees to ensure that we supply sustainable services. And then the Municipal Act, which then further indicates that we must set tariffs which will then allow us to recover for the cost of the service offered. And we must also levy and bill consumers for the service that has been given, but also of important credit control and debt collection policies which must be in place and must be informed as required. The other ones is MFMA, which guides the municipality in terms of managing revenue and how to collect that. And also the Water Services Act, which indicates that consumers are legally obliged to pay what is considered reasonable for water and services that they consume. And then the final one is the bylaws and tariffs, which are then done at the municipal level. And then in terms of the payment and the implication, there is a few payment options that you normally get from a municipal perspective, which are a full payment, which you need to make sure that to pay, and that sort of gets the municipality to be able to operate the way that they're supposed to operate. And then you also get people who do partial payment, which then becomes sort of irregular and may cause errors or cash flow uncertainty in as far as municipalities are concerned. Then you also get non-payment, which are defaulters, and usually that you deal with them through the legal actions or enforcement of bylaws and your credit control. Then you also get, it says that water is a free basic need, so you also get where you need to provide for those that are less fortunate, which we call them, indigent household, which then you give them 6 kiloliters is what it's considered to be sufficient for them for the month. The implications I've already mentioned, that if payment is not done, then that has an effect in terms of operational and maintenance cost, and also revenue shortfall, and also which may then burden the municipality as far as the debt is concerned. So the approach in terms of the citizens to make sure that they pay, we then strengthen our revenue collection through smart metering, accurate billing, and making sure that the bills are out on time and the accurate meter readings are done. You also look at incentives. I know there are allowance where you can look at incentives where certain parameters are actually done, where you find that consumers are actually going over an extra mile to make sure that they preserve water. Then awareness and transparency, public campaigns, and also community engagement, just to make sure that the public is aware. And enforcement, which I've covered quite extensively in terms of credit control and legal recovery. We've also dealt with issues of free basic services, which talks to affordability, and then also partnerships and innovations, where you send reminders and, also using collaboration with other means to make sure that, the collections are actually done. I think in conclusion, considering that I probably left with 30 seconds, we then need to make sure that, water security, we actually look into that. And that also depends on sustainable financing and also responsibility of the citizens, and also making sure that the municipality plays its role in as far as that is concerned, and that legal frameworks are strong. They are actually put in place, such as your credit control, as I've mentioned, and that compliance, it's actually done the way that it's supposed to happen. And in conclusion, also improved payments, it's equals to better infrastructure and sustainability. Chairperson, I hope I've managed within the time given. I will end my presentation here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Asa. Thank you for giving us that foundation, sharing really how you draw from different revenue streams as the municipality to cover your services. Colleagues, as we go through the program, you are very much welcome to pose your questions in the chat, but we do have a dedicated slot to also engage at length, around those. So we will not be having questions immediately after each speaker. We're just going to go through the next three speakers, and then we'll have our Q&A session during them. But then to look at the issues of implications in terms of employment, poverty, and inequality, would like to hear from Hamida. Hamida, I would like to welcome you to the platform. Hamida is from the South African Transport and Allied Workers Union. She's also a senior researcher, and her work has really focused on climate change, issues of transport, the just transition in relation to transport, energy, mining, and food sectors, and really how the minimum wage, is relevant to across all those economic sectors. And from her, we really would like to hear, perspectives around what is the sense from the labor, sector, the movement, whether the workers actually feel that they are able to afford such municipal services. And I would like to hand over to you, Hamida, if you can please switch on your mic. I see you're still on mute. Please unmute and then over to you. Thank you. You have 15 minutes.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the opportunity. So just to say, I mean, I think I might come from the trade union movement, but the working class is much broader, and I think I'd like to give a working class perspective. So, of course, workers are part of that. Just to say that one of the areas that I did research in was water. So let me say that it's really heartbreaking that having done the research several years ago, I haven't recently been doing work on water. Unfortunately, although it still remains quite an important passion of mine. The kinds of challenges that we've faced historically, meaning from apartheid moving into our new dispensation, and then almost 40 years later, it seems like the circumstances have actually deteriorated in relation to the quality of the services as well as what's been happening within the municipalities, which in some ways begs the bigger question. And I think when we talk about, and I suppose after the questions and the specific focus, we can then engage about why is it that we are in the situation that we are in. So let me first acknowledge the previous speaker, who comes from a municipality. And of course, I mean, one of the issues as a civil society activist, and that somebody who's coming from labor, we've been engaging, in fact, historically from the early 2000s with the Department of Water Affairs and with various stakeholders within government, municipalities in particular, to challenge this whole notion of cost recovery and to challenge the fact that you cannot move from a historically disadvantaged context where you gave the RDP 4 years and then automatically moved into gear, neoliberalism, privatization, and then as the previous speaker spoke quite eloquently around the question of cost recovery. Now, for those comrades who might have not, if you want to understand what cost recovery means, it means that every single cost incurred in relation to a service has to be recouped. Now, historically, as in prior to 1994, the South African government, which was an apartheid state, and because the water services or municipal services were considered a public good, substantively subsidized infrastructure, the supply and distribution of water, and therefore the cost for the water was minimal because it was highly subsidized and water was operated from a perspective where it's seen as a public good, as opposed to it being a commodity where that you have to provide, people then have to pay you for that commodity. It has to be on a cost recovery basis, and then the sustainability of the municipality is dependent on the amount of money that you receive. Now, if the playing field is equal, and this is assuming one supports cost recovery and privatization or commodification of our water services and sanitation services, or any of our municipal services for that matter, one would assume that the infrastructure is already there, and all you'd be doing is doing operation and maintenance. The distribution network is already in place, and therefore it would just be about, as I said, operation, maintenance, and then water costs, and you would then incrementally increase it to ensure that you meet your operation costs. But what happens when a municipality is given a new jurisdiction where infrastructure is failed, or where there's no infrastructure at all? How then do you place the burden? And for us coming from an apartheid state, how do you burden people who were burdened under the apartheid state by virtue of the fact that they were not given services? Then you say you will now pay for the services that you were not given under apartheid because we now need to do it from a cost recovery perspective. So I've seen and I've done research in relation to this, particularly in the context of prepaid water meters being installed in communities who did not have access to water, precisely because the municipality knew that people being poor would not be able to sustain the kind of tariffs or costs that they were giving to people in more middle class areas that had infrastructure. So they put in a prepaid water meter, and I'm speaking about Madlebe in particular in KZN, and we saw the worst outbreak of cholera as a result of a cost recovery measure. Right? People didn't get access to water in terms of the context of affordability, but we actually saw the worst cholera outbreak as a result. When you take the issue of the prepaid water meters in Soweto and in Piri in particular, South Africa had embarked on a management contract with Suez or Joburg, and formed an entity called Joburg Water. It was a 5-year contract, 5-year management contract. And the main aim was to, through the process of a private company, provide skills for the municipality to be able to deliver. And as our initial speaker, I think it was the Professor Tawala, when you were engaging, when you introduced the session, we spoke about efficiency, effectiveness, sustainability. I mean, you mentioned affordability, but it's barely mentioned in the approach, or affordability inverted commas, because one doesn't interrogate affordability for who. So when we talk about sustainability, efficiency, and effectiveness, one of the means of cost recovery is prepaid water meters. Now, Johannesburg Water, the municipality had a water leaks problem. So unaccounted for water meaning water that was being bought from Rand Water was basically running down the drain because the pipes, the infrastructure was not refurbished. So whose problem was that? According to Joburg Water, it was the community's problem. So they instructed Suez through the entity of Joburg Water. So the city of Johannesburg instructed Suez to refurbish the infrastructure and then begin to charge people on the basis of cost recovery for the infrastructure that was refurbished, but not that they damaged. As a result of that, we found, I did research on this in relation to free basic water in Piri, and there was actually a constitutional case or a constitutional court case taken to the Constitutional Court to fight for the right for people to be able to access water. If I have to explain to you what some of the gendered implications were when you approach water, not understanding households, but purely from a cost recovery perspective. One household example, you've got a husband and a wife with 4 children. In terms of patriarchy and understandings of how families work, the husband will bath first. But because there's this constraint in relation to access to water and affordability, after he's bathed, his 3 sons will bath in the same water. This is empirical. I went and researched and documented this. 3 sons then bath in the same water. Then the mother baths in that same water. Once the water is used, once she's had a bath, they then take the washing, or their dirty washing, and put it in the bath to soak. Once the clothing has soaked and it's put in buckets, that water is then used for flushing. Now, I'd like to know which middle class or rich family is subjected to this kind of water demand management. In instances where you were not able to, or you used more than your 6 kiloliters of water, or where the municipality cut you, you then had to do a system called pour and flush. So you were given a tap, you had to fill water in a bucket, and your toilets then had to operate through a process of pour and flush. There's tons of research that has been done in relation to the implications of cost recovery and a cost recovery method of operation for municipal services, particularly water. In fact, I was just reading a Water Research Commission report. I don't have the actual name, but I know it's number 2584. And it was looking at different municipalities across, I think, 2 or 3 regions in the country. And the horrific finding from this particular report indicates that despite the fact that the municipalities have something called free basic water, or the Indigent policy, and I'm going to get into that, because of the block tariff, which many people seem to argue, and municipalities to date still implement on the basis of cost recovery, seeing it as a mechanism in which you must cost for water, despite the fact that the World Bank has declared progressive block tariffs as being regressive, South Africa continues to use a progressive block tariff. And in actual fact, you'd find evidence where once you've gone past the first step of 6 kiloliters given either to indigent households or to poor households, the moment you get to the next step, so your 0 to 6 could be free, but the moment you go to 7 to 11, the cost for using 4 kiloliters more is actually incorporating the cost of the 6 kiloliters that was free plus your 4 kiloliters. And as you progressively go up, it means that somewhere along the line, it's the poor subsidizing the poor. So there's a fundamental problem with the manner in which water is being costed. Even in relation to the issues of free basic water and something called an assurance of supply levy. I mean, an assurance of supply levy, again, for those who are not familiar, an assurance of supply levy is something that municipalities who largely have holiday houses are allowed to charge an assurance of supply levy, so that during the months when there's nobody in the house, they're able to charge for a service, otherwise they become non-sustainable. Sometimes municipalities actually implemented an assurance of supply levy together with an indigent policy. And as a result of the assurance of supply levy, right, that was on poor people's bills, they were being cut off, not because of consumption, but because of an assurance of supply levy. And fortunately, when I done the research, particularly using the Mussel Bay case as a case in point, the Department of Water Affairs at the time recognized that there was a contradiction in the legislation, and it actually ensured that you cannot have the assurance of supply levy running concurrently with free basic water or indigent policy. I think when we talk about, and I mean, when you talk about the gendered implications in relation to free basic water, or even households, I mean, what happens when women are menstruating? Nobody has gone out to do empirical research to actually measure out how much of water women actually need. And if you've got more than one woman in the household, or you've got an elderly woman with maybe 4 or 5 daughters who all menstruate at different times of the day, but you're giving them 6 kiloliters or 10 kiloliters free. And then the next step is a tier at which people cannot just afford, they're unable to afford it. What kind of experience would these young women or elderly women have to go through when they are menstruating? So there's the issue around how many times you can bath, whether you flush the toilet, your own personal hygiene issues. I mean, if you're in a middle class or rich environment, you can shower as many times as you want because you can afford the water. But for a poor household, every single drop is calculated, but it is not commensurate with people's needs. And this is where there's a major, major challenge in the country at the moment. If you look at municipalities, and I know we were talking about, I'm going to conclude. So I know the last point was the issue around finances and how does one restructure our financial model. I think we need to really move back to understanding that water, we are not customers. This is not something that we consume. This is a need. It is a right. And our challenge has been that the right to water has become a right to access. But access is linked to affordability and to cost recovery. And the current mode of a modus operandi in the current context of corruption, where municipalities have a free rein without regulation to charge tariffs that are completely and utterly unaffordable, is why we sit in the problem that we currently have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hamida, you're well within your time. I thought maybe you're going to use the rest of your time, but thanks a lot for really raising some societally relevant questions, which I think some of our colleagues from the municipal space, ASSAf, will address later on. But really thanks for putting forward some of the critical issues when we look at our societal dynamics, issues of affordability in our household. Colleagues, I would like us now to move on to the next speaker. That is Dr. Neo Mukone, who comes from the University of Mpumalanga. That is the Faculty of Economics, Development and Business Sciences, where he holds a postdoctoral fellowship. His work has really mainly focused around economic and social policy in the context of food and water security, climate change, African philanthropy, governance systems and governance sustainability, and also policy analysis. So overall, he's had scholarly interest in development and socio-economic transformation. It is actually his work that is done within the Northwest Province of South Africa that actually made him to be recommended for today's webinar, and we look forward to hearing from you. Over to you now.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that succinct introduction. Let me take this opportunity to acknowledge the fellow presenters and the entire participants who have managed to join us. So in as far as today's presentation is concerned, Chair, I will deal with the issue of why should we pay and can we afford to pay from the perspective of household economics. If I may request, Chair, that can I please put off my camera so that I can mainly focus on the content so that I remain within the time that have been allocated.
That is fine. That is fine.
Thank you.
Please proceed now. We still have your first slide.
Just a second, please.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the presentation, I would look into the following issues, the concept of water security, just to add over and above what my previous colleagues or speakers have said. in relation to the water security, maybe also provide evidence or findings in as far as socioeconomic status influencing access to water and sanitation. But critically, I would look into the affordability of services for citizens, of course, taking into cognizance what the previous speakers have alluded to in regard to that point, but importantly, look into the difference between the urban and rural access in as far as water and sanitation is concerned, and make a few recommendations, or rather propose models to especially how we can bridge the gap between water security and socioeconomic status, having reflected on the evidence of how the socioeconomic status can influence access to water. So I'm not going to go through the definitions here, but just to put that the concept of water security has received enormous attention over the past decade, or between both policy and academic debates, with multiple definitions existing. So I take that colleagues are familiar with the definition. I just wanted to strengthen my foundation as and when I deal with the topic that I'll be focusing on. So mostly, most cited definitions are that of Gray and Sadov, who looks into the availability of acceptable quantity and quality, as well as Cook and Barker, who also looked into the sustainable availability of adequate quantities and qualities of water, as well as the Global Water Partnership and the UN Water. What is important out of this definition, Chair, as I've mentioned, that there's no universally or a global agreed upon definition. However, there are broad consensus on the key elements of water security, or one of it being the availability, as you have seen on the definitions, that availability as a consensus, it has been agreed that we need to ensure sufficient water quantity to meet the human and economic and ecosystem needs. Also, there's a consensus around the issue of quality, where water must be safe for consumption and use. Where, I mean, if you have listened to Hameda's presentation, that you find one household using same water for bathing and for doing their laundry, and to an extent, maybe flush their toilets with. And so there's a consensus around that issue, that water must be safe for consumption and use for such households, or generally. There's the issue of sustainability, where water use must not be compromised. We should not compromise the needs of the future generation as far as sustainability is concerned. We need to take care of our own needs, but at the very same time, take into cognizance the needs of the future generation. There's an issue of resilience, consensus about the issue of resilience, where societies and infrastructure should be able to cope with drought, floods, contamination, and other water-related hazards. Also, all people should have affordable access to water for basic human needs, in as far as Astra mentioned the issues of legislation. So there's a consensus around that everyone need to have an affordable access to water, rich or poor. But also, in as far as governance and security is concerned, there's a consensus that the political stability, effective institutions, and policies are essential to ensure long-term or sustainable water security. With this being said, Chair, I then need to look into the evidence of socioeconomic statuses, or how do socioeconomic status influence access to water. So there is evidence existing within the literature. If you look into the work that I've done with Prof. Gomet in 2024 and 2025, one of our studies, when we looked into these indicators, particularly, we focused on the income, education, household resources. The finding revealed that wealthier or educated households can adopt water storage and conservations compared to poor households who struggle to sustain access. But also, higher income communities are more resilient to water scarcity through infrastructure and governance, while low income communities remain very vulnerable. McKenzie also, who has done a study in South Africa, he focused on the parameters such as income, education, and employment. And in his study, he found the findings were such that lower income households were far less likely to have piped water or improved sanitation compared to higher socioeconomic households. Also, Oscar et al., who has done also a wonderful study in South Africa focusing on the informal settlements, has found out that 40% of low-income households relied on unsafe or distant water sources compared to higher income households who represent only 10%. So you can just see from here the huge disparities that exist between the higher income and the low income households. But I've tested the literature to go outside South Africa and check, though still within Africa. And Njaki also comes with the same evidence. Her findings support the evidence that already exists that higher income and educated households had more than 80% access to piped water, while the lower income households had less than 50% access. And of course, this goes back to what previous speakers have mentioned in as far as the comparison. And as well as in Ghana, there was a study that was done by Dong Zalga, who also mentioned found rather that lower socioeconomic status households had reduced access to improved water and sanitation compared to higher income households who had better coverage. And the question should be, what does this findings mean in real terms? So in terms of responding to the question of affordability, having presented the evidence to respond to the question of, can citizens really afford to pay? So I've put a picture there on our far right. You can see the picture says it all, Chair, that many of our citizens cannot afford to pay, regardless of the legislative background that ASSAf has provided. Looking to the Municipal Finance Management Act, the Water Systems, the Municipal Systems Act, regardless of that legislation, it is evident, Chair, if you look at the picture, that many cannot afford to pay for the services. Poor households spend up to at least 50% of their income on basic services, whereas rural households sometimes pay about 300 to 1,000 per water delivery. So in an event, in a study that Hameda did in KZN, you imagine that if that particular household have finished the water that they've sourced for 1,000 rand, and most of them, they are not working, they rely on maybe on a pension of the old lady in the house, where are they going to get that money also in order to pay or get water in their household? Even with tariffs at 1 or 2% of income, many still struggle to afford to pay for services. And with this being said, should we say citizens should pay now? So from the legislation that ASSAf has given us, and we can agree that payment is necessary, especially if services are reliable and very fair. So why do they pay? Because payments, they'll obviously assist in terms of funding infrastructure, as we know the issues of aging infrastructure, and they will assist with operations over and above the grant that municipalities normally receive. However, people resist to pay when supply is unreliable, when billing is unfair. And these are some of the issues that, of course, they are being raised. The issues of billing that or corruption is being suspected. So when community suspect that there's corruption, there's that resistance to pay. So why do people resist to pay, which is one of the fundamental questions that I added in order to make sense out of the issues of affordability of services. People resist to pay primarily because of poor service delivery, where there are frequent cuts of services, be it electricity, be it water, so forth and so on. There are leaks, there's low water quality, so also when there are issues of mistrust in municipalities, where there's a corruption that is being suspected and where there's poor billing and the rising tariffs, but declining quality. Tariffs keeps on being increased, but the service and the quality keeps on declining. So these are some of the reasons people resist to pay. Generally, not that they don't want to pay, but once some of these things come into effect, people start to resist to pay. So critically, what is the real issue if this issue of socioeconomic status influencing access to water? So it is evident that affordability and trust are the major barriers. So therefore, citizens are willing to pay when services are reliable, fair, and affordable. So that is the issue. And I've placed recommendations there. I want to be going through recommendations one by one in the interest of time. So what are the differences between the urban and rural access to water and sanitation in South Africa? So if you look into the table on the left, We have got indicators, the urban and rural access. You'd see that in 2024, and this is a data that I got from Stats SA, that 72% of urban residents had access to safely managed water compared to only 36% of the rural population. And in as far as access to basic water, you see that in urban areas, 27 had access to basic water, while in the rural areas, there's about 44.2% that had access to basic water. And basic water service in this context refers to an improved source where collection takes no more than 30 minutes for a round trip to go and fetch water and queue in there. In as far as access, access to safely managed sanitation, in urban areas, 75% had access, and in rural areas, about 79%. So this is mainly due to the widespread use of improved facilities shared with other households, accounting for 21%, as well as the use of shared sanitation facilities, as you see the stats there. So what are the recommended models to bridge the existing gaps? So we propose the pro-poor tariff system, where we ensure affordability for the poor households. The community-based water management, and I like it because ASSAf has mentioned issues of public participation, public awareness. So we recommend that as one community-based water management as one of the models where we empower communities to ensure accountability and sustainability. But importantly, we recommend the public-private partnership, the PPP, as one of the model that we need to look into, where there's collaboration between government and private sector as well as the NGOs to finance and to find a way of financing and managing these services, these basic services to our communities by mobilizing investment for undeserved areas and expand infrastructure that is aging. But importantly, Chair, one of the models is to look into social protection subsidies, how should we subsidize our communities and reduce affordability barriers and importantly support vulnerable groups. As I conclude, Chair, it is evident that water security is multidimensional and directly it is influenced by socioeconomic statuses. Affordability, Chair, in relation to the question, should citizens pay or not, remains a major barrier for low-income households. So there need to be studies around the issue of affordability, that how then should we navigate the issue of affordability, taking into cognizance the legislation and the policies that ASSAf has spoken to, while there's evidence also that it's a major barrier, especially in the low-income household. In as far as policy implication, we need to ensure that water governance frameworks prioritize the poor and address urban and rural disparities. Chair, as I conclude, thank you, Chair.
Right on time, Neo, thanks a lot, and for giving that quantitative, analysis on how, earning potential and socioeconomic status coupled with education in the household really are parameters that influence access and affordability of water and sanitation services. I do anticipate that we will have quite a few questions concerning your presentations, but we are going to be moving on to the next presentation now. As we mentioned, we are also going to be drawing international insights from the UK in this case. When we met with Alex, he gave a presentation which I really thought our local audience, should really have an ear to. So it is my pleasure at this time to welcome Professor Alex Ford from the University of Portsmouth, where he is the Deputy Director of the Center for Blue Governance and leading research programs concerning his expertise in aquatic toxicology, ecotoxicology, parasitology, as well as marine pollution. He serves on the board of the International Panel on Chemical Pollution, the IPCP, which really highlights his research role influencing international policy frameworks. But today we really would like to hear the perspectives of a privatized water and sanitation service in the UK. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Malusi, and welcome, and thank you very much to your team and the people on the panel and the audience today for the opportunity to sort of give this story. And this is very much a personal story from an environmental toxicologist that has been concerned about ecosystem health, but what I'm doing also applies to human health as well. This diagram I've got on the right-hand side of the figure here is from an organization called Top of the Poops, and they plot the sewage discharges by different water companies. So each color represents a different privatized water company. And I'm based down here on the yellow on the south coast of England, down here. And this figure here is I've gone into an app by a charity called Surfers Against Sewage that have for many decades have been banging this drum about issues about sewage pollution going into the ocean. And they've developed an app, which is a brilliant app where you could go on and find out whether your beach is discharging more sewage and make a conscious decision about whether you want to go surfing there that day and the chances of getting ill. And as you can see today, it's very red. So a large part of the United Kingdom is just spilling untreated sewage directly into our coasts. And that is because our infrastructure can't cope. A lot of our wastewater joins runoff from our houses and road runoff. So it's a combined sewage system. And the water companies are permitted to discharge untreated sewage into our rivers and into our coasts under exceptional rainfall conditions. And the problem that has become apparent is that they don't discharge under exceptional rainfall conditions. They just discharge quite often under quite modest rainfall or even no rainfall whatsoever, because the infrastructure is no longer fit for purpose. On this next slide, I've got a map, and we're looking south here. So if we were to carry on going in that direction of my cursor, we would head towards the north of France. But this island here is Portsea Island, which is where the city of Portsmouth is, where our university is. It's the only island city in the United Kingdom. And this, my laboratory is just on the very end here, and this is called Langston Harbour. It's a natural harbour. And I've been working here for 17, 18 years, and I've always been shocked at the amount of just raw sewage that gets discharged over highly protected marine areas. So this is a World Heritage Site, a site of special scientific interest, a special area of conservation, a special protection area. There's multiple nature reserves, and it's got international recognition for migratory birds that land here and feed off the mudflats. It's a nursery for fish. There's seals and all sorts of things. But unfortunately, this sewage treatment plant in the red box here can't cope when it rains, and it just discharges nearly 500,000 people's worth of sewage directly over that land. It comes out with so much force. In the bottom right-hand corner, you can see a picture, a LiDAR picture. So essentially from space, I think you can see the groove cut out in the sediment, that the raw sewage comes out so much that it creates a large pool in the mud. We've done quite a lot of research here looking to the chemical pollution as a result of these sewage spills. So this graph at the top here is just the concentration of just pharmaceuticals and pesticides before and after a sewage spill. So in the kind of pinky red color, you get these enormous spikes, and the axis is logged. So what you're getting is at 100 to 1,000-fold increases in some pharmaceuticals and pesticides detected in that semi-enclosed marine environment following rainfall and sewage discharges. And so not only do the concentrations of chemicals increase, but the number of chemicals that we detect increases as well, which is the bottom graph. And sometimes we can detect chemicals when there aren't official spills going on as well. So in this instance, again, in sort of pinky red color, these are known spills that have occurred. But prior to one of the known spills, you've got this huge spike in cocaine. So this could well have been a spill that wasn't reported by the water company. And as a result of our work, we've had quite a lot of press attention. The BBC News have hosted their entire show from the roof of our labs, and that's looking over Langston Harbour in the background. And they've conducted their own investigations and found out that a lot of the water companies spill sewage when there hasn't been rainfall. And another group called Unearthed, which is the investigative arm of Greenpeace, they found that a lot of these sewage spills occur in very close proximity to highly protected marine areas. And our water industry, certainly in England, was privatised back in 1989 by Margaret Thatcher. It's regulated by the Environment Agency and the Water Services Regulatory Authority, called Ofwat for finances. Largely as a combined sewer system, and as I said, when it can't cope, it discharges that sewage through around about 15,000 stormwater overflows. And yeah, it's licensed to do this under exceptional rainfall conditions, and the concerns are that it does it when there's not exceptional rainfall. In Scotland, at the top there in green, it's still nationalised, or still national hands, and Northern Ireland. Wales is private but not for profit, but England was split into 9 private water companies, and these are owned largely by offshore investors, hedge fund groups, private equity groups. So the concern is that it's just for profit, and it doesn't have the public in mind. And as a result of privatization, they are now about 70 billion in debt, and the infrastructure is no longer coping because there hasn't been satisfactory investment back into that infrastructure since they took over 36 years ago. So, as I mentioned, there's been exceptional public concern. The Environment Agency in England is now conducting its largest ever investigation into the water industry. Those regulators, the Environment Agency and the financial regulator Ofwat, are being investigated themselves for whether they've done a decent job in regulation. There are several judicial reviews going on, and there's many ongoing civil court cases as a result of sewage discharges impacting fishing areas, tourist areas, areas of fly fishing and various different things. So here's a screenshot of the Environment Agency investigation. Started on the 18th of November 2021. So and here's an update now from February 2025. It's still going on. It's been going on for 4 years, and it's not looking to conclude anytime soon. Here's another screenshot where the House of Lords, which is the upper tier in Parliament, is investigating the water industry and whether lower tiers of Parliament have been doing their job. This is the newly opened Office of Environmental Protection, which has produced a damning report on the government. And it concludes, through its investigation, the Office of Environmental Protection found there have been failures to comply with environmental law by the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, the Environment Agency, on Ofwat, relating to the regulation of network CSOs, those stormwater overflows by the water companies. So that is a government body set up, and it's found that the government isn't doing its job, essentially, in regulating the water industry. And only in the last month, there's been an independent water commission published, and it's come to the conclusion it needs a complete overhaul of the water sector in England and Wales. It's suggested to do away with the financial regulator because it's failed in its financial regulation, because the water companies are in so much debt. They've had to put up bills by 50% recently. They are leaking about 30% of the water through cracks in the pipes, and obviously they're spilling quite regularly sewage into our ecosystem. One of the criticisms of this independent commission was the government didn't give it the scope to ask the question whether the privatized water industry in England should be renationalized, because there is quite a lot of public support for that to happen. if you open the news in any week, there is headlines about the water industry. Thames Water appears to have been on the brink of bankruptcy now for over a year, and a lot of the lenders are not supportive and pulling out, and is having to be propped up at the moment by the government. Many of the other water companies are not in a good financial state either, and obviously I've mentioned that there is a lot of sewage spills going on. So between 2019 and 2023, there were 12.7 million consented hours of sewage discharges. So these are the ones which are reported. So there was a lot of thought that many of these, even though they're classed as consented, they probably weren't consented. And the water companies were spilling when they were the rainfall was not at a level where they were consented to spill. And there's probably others which have gone on which haven't been reported as well. So this is possibly a tip of the iceberg. If you add that together, and if it all came out of one pipe, that would be the equivalent of 1,500 years of discharging in 4 years. Now, a lot of scientists have studied the framework of disinformation from polluting industries which impact human and ecosystem health. And this is one such paper, and they looked into alcohol, chemical industry, oil industry, gambling, pharmaceutical, tobacco industry. And they found commonalities in the tactics that they used to deny what was going on, deflect or delay further regulation. And this is one paper, and the next one is another one. There's a number of these coming out where people have developed a framework where other people can study other organizations and industries. So we did that. As a result of those papers, you may have come across some of these Hollywood movies, Erin Brockovich with Julia Roberts, and there's Dark Waters with Mark Ruffalo that looked into the forever chemical scandal in the US. And there's numerous popular science books now on the disinformation tactics by companies. And they follow what I call as all the Ds. So you've got denial, disruption, disinformation, distraction, distortion, discredit, dominate, capture, deflection, cast doubt, and delay. So we've looked at those frameworks in relation to the privatized water industry in the UK, and out of the 28 tactics which other people have discovered, we found examples which could be attributed to 22 with the water industry. And I'm paraphrasing here, but this has been the argument from the water industry. We don't discharge raw sewage. And when questioned on that, okay, we do discharge raw sewage, but it's not very much. It doesn't cause harm as it's very dilute. And then questioned again, okay, it does cause some harm, but farmers cause much more harm than we do. If we don't discharge raw sewage, it will back up into schools and hospitals. So obviously taking a rather emotive approach there, because obviously people don't want raw sewage in schools and hospitals. It's perfectly normal and permitted by the Environment Agency, and they've subsequently admitted that, okay, some of what they do is not in line with their permits. We can fix it, but it would cost the public lots of money and cause huge disruption. So it's kind of threatening the public, oh, careful what you wish for, because it might cost you $700 billion pounds to sort out. Another thing they say is we've adopted a Victorian infrastructure, which is pre-1900s, when the reality is actually a very small proportion of our infrastructure in the UK is Victorian. So there's lots of excuses there for some of the things. So we've gone through, we've looked at their social media messaging where they sort of denied that they do raw sewage or sort of play it down or blame other people. And this is
left, Alex.
Yeah, sorry?
4 minutes left.
Okay, thank you. This is a typical example where this was a water company on the south coast where they used to have quite a good traffic light system where if it had lit up red, you would know that there'd been a sewage spill. If it was yellow, there'd been a sewage spill in the last 48 hours. And if it was blue, it was fine. They changed it so it turns white if it was a sewage spill. So you can't see it amongst all the blue. And it would only change to red or yellow if it had been verified. But very often they weren't verified in time, so they go back to being blue. And they changed the way that they classify sewage spills. Some they class as genuine, some they class as genuine but not impacting. So they'd made a conscious decision to go, yeah, we did have a spill, but it wasn't enough to impact a bathing water beach in terms of its bacterial levels. And in others, they're classed as not genuine. But there is a lot of these spills going on. You can go up to 1 million minutes there, and I've worked out what that is equivalent to in hours, days, and years. But a lot of these sewage spills are recorded by event duration monitors, which are essentially a sensor on the end of the pipe which tells you when something's flowing through it. And we found out that a lot of these sensors aren't working very well. So there's quite a lot of discharge pipes which 100% of the time are not working. But interestingly, when the water companies have said there is a non-genuine spill going on, they happen with a curious correlation to when real spills occur. So this is a map, a timeline of a typical day. Most sewage spills happen around breakfast time when people get up and start using water for various different means, having showers and things. Not genuine spills happen at exactly the same amount of time as genuine spills. So it's probably a lot of those not genuine classified spills are actually really genuine ones. The water companies also said that they're non-impacting, but we've also found that some of these non-impacting discharges can go on for weeks. So to suggest that a sewage spill going on for weeks is non-impacting is just nonsense. As a result of this, 0% of our rivers in England are in good overall status. 0% are in high overall status. 23% are classed as poor. 85% of river stretches fall below good ecological stances. Only 15% reach good status. So obviously it's worse in England, a little bit better. You can see the blue here in Wales, a little bit better in Scotland, where they've got more rural areas and less urbanized areas. So just to conclude, a privatized water industry, which is poorly regulated, both financially and environmentally, will result in incentives for profit at the expense of human and ecosystem health. As water becomes more scarce and profitable through climate change, these perverse incentives to put profit before human and ecosystem health will only become stronger. Thank you for listening.
Alex, thanks a lot. Firstly, for being within time for your presentation. I was really pushing for that because I do suspect that we'll really like to engage further as the audience on your presentation. In South Africa, we do have a history of rising magnitude of privatizing services such as education, health and security, and I think the rationale has been that the quality gets better. And I think with the pressing challenges of energy and water, systems in South Africa, there have been calls also for privatizing, and I think the energy industry, particularly for electricity, is in terms of those discussions, is steaming ahead. So it really is something that is important, that we do not dispute that we've got challenges with regards to securing our water access is an issue for most of citizens. But as we heard also today, that affordability is also something that is critical, and those are things that we should really examine with real evidence if we are to consider how we reinforce as our end goal, water security. So we really appreciate those perspectives coming from the UK. And I think now, colleagues, we've reached a point where we can engage, to raise the remarks or ask questions from the presentations that we've had now. I will request that if you do have a question or would like to make a remark, just briefly introduce yourself, your name and the institution that you come from, so that we can get a sense, of the participation from the audience that we have currently. So you can please raise your hand, but I immediately notice that Eugene, you've switched on your camera, but if you want to ask a question, please also unmute. I assume you've got something. Over to you, Prof. Peter.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Twala. Thank you very much for all the presenters. I found it very insightful. Just one or two comments. You know, we need in the world a total mind shift around sewage treatment. Sewage treatment is a grudge for municipalities and for countries, while it is one of the biggest resources that we have. It's rich in phosphate, rich in carbon, organic material, rich in nitrogen, and so on. It is the ideal biotechnological substrate. Contains all the most expensive molecules and substances in there. There are about at least 10 value-added products that can be produced from sewage. So here's my idea. We must turn sewage plants into companies that produce these 10 odd products, or one or two of the 10, make them profitable so that they become places where people make money and the byproduct is clean water. Then we solve the sewage problem in the world. We convert the phosphate, the nitrogen, and the organic matter into useful products. And I can speak long about that. That's the first intervention, I think, that will change what we do with sewage, not only in South Africa, but also worldwide, specifically listening to the problems that Professor Ford spoke about. That's the one thing. In terms of the water supply, just a question perhaps to the representative from the Tshwane municipality. We noticed that water is tanked to areas where people do not have water. They go in tanks at a huge cost. So my question is, instead of tanking water to people living in these places which don't have access, why do they not install rainwater harvesting tanks? In fact, I believe in a country like South Africa, where water is scarce, we should, like in Australia, in many places in Australia, it is legislation that you must have a water harvesting tank next to your home, because that immediately alleviates the problem of water availability. It's there, it's cheap, it's cheap. I've done some costings in terms of water tanks and what it costs to deliver water by the tank system that is used. You could probably by now have installed about 10 to 15,000 rainwater harvesting tanks in those areas. So I want the question, why is that not considered or ever spoken about? And then, of course, the other big problem around the world, as we've also just heard by Professor Ford, is the lack of maintenance of infrastructure. You know, we can't keep on blaming all of the past. We should ask ourselves, why are we not maintaining our roads? Why have we not maintained infrastructure over the past 30 years? Why has water and sanitation not improved over the past 30 years for people? And why does this disparity still continue in South Africa 30 years into a new democracy? Surely we should have done a lot better by now. And I'll stop there for now. So turning sewage plants into factories that make profit, where companies fight over the sewage and they produce clean water. And secondly, rainwater harvesting tanks for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof, for that recommendation on commercializing, aspects of that material. You raised a question. I do note your hand, Hamida, but there was a question raised, and I'll come to you afterwards, which was earmarked. And I assume it's not just for you, ASSAf, but as somebody who presented from the municipality perspective, if there are any colleagues who are attending from the municipalities, you are also welcome to address this question that was raised about, why are we not, as municipalities, pushing for rainwater harvesting? But what we see when there's issues of disconnection, of no supply, water is actually trapped in to those areas. Asa, if you can respond to that.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question. Look, it's an interesting question, so I'm going to answer it from the perspective of the municipalities. I think municipalities are exploring various ways of, managing water, and one of that, on the water demand initiatives that I've mentioned, part of that is actually rainwater harvesting. However, in terms of that, let's look at it. Tankering usually it's used as a temporary measure to provide water. That's the basis in which tankering is supposed to be. So you'll find that most of the municipalities are supplying informal settlement. Now I'm talking from a perspective of a city like City of Tshwane, where you find that you are now supplying informal settlement using that tankering, or in instances where there is disruption or intermittent supply, then you then use tankering. Yes, tankering, it is it's not a conventional way that you want to supply water. However, in terms of rainwater harvesting, now the issue becomes, it's not a local government sort of responsibility alone. And what I mean by that is, for you to be able to put infrastructure, you'll either have to have a collaboration with housing, low-cost housing and so forth, where there is now formalized. You are then able to, collect, because for you to collect water, you will need sort of a good collection area, either from your roof or whatever. If you've got underground, systems, then you'll then need paved surfaces so that you are then able to collect whatever water that you can be able to collect. So in instances where you've got informal settlement, it becomes almost impossible to actually do rainwater harvesting. But talking from a rural perspective, yes, I think that is that is possible. Where you find that you're collaborating with rural areas where they've got formal structures, then you are able to, through other subsidies, which I know the national government would then equitable shares that they are providing for indigent household or for rural development, where you can then look into rainwater harvesting. So yes, it is something that we are talking about it. I think the implementation of it in the city perspective, it becomes almost expensive because of the kind of infrastructure that is required. But most importantly, the other reason, South Africa is a very water scarce country. And, if you are going to solely rely on rainwater harvesting, our patterns are very, they're not stable in a way, our rainwater patterns. So what then do you do in instances where you don't have rain? How do you then supply water? So you'll still find yourself having a combination of, the tankering and also, rain when rain season comes. Alternatively, what we're also looking at, you'll then probably need to look at decoupling with boreholes, installation of boreholes in instances where you don't have dolomitic areas. Then you can sink boreholes and then supplement another source of water. So rainwater harvesting, yes, but with a combination of other methods, especially in rural areas or in informal settlement. But in terms of residential or where it's well developed, it is encouraged. We are actually putting in a policy currently where companies are using rainwater harvesting for non-potable use for gardens and all of that. So there is a policy. We are already using one of them in Pretoria, for example. The new building here, Reserve Bank, actually looking at groundwater and rainwater harvesting. So there is those initiatives that are currently.
No, thanks, Asa. It's encouraging to hear that you are actually, through policy measures, exploring heightening the extent of rainwater harvesting. And I think the sense that I got is that it can create a buffer during times of shortage or emergencies in a way more efficient manner than we actually would when we have to now look around for tracking systems. And that was the sense that I got. But I think what's encouraging is that you are now looking at a policy, and I think, or I hope that it will cascade into the architectural rules of the municipality for future developments going forward. But thanks for that feedback. Hamida, you've been holding on for quite a while. Please, over to you.
Thanks very much. So I want to respond to Professor Eugene. So, I mean, you know, what you're talking about is an integrated water resource management plan, right? Which looks at not only rainwater harvesting, but you've got replenishment of aquifers, you've got the issues of operation, maintenance, plugging, unaccounted for water, etc., etc. It has to be a whole re-looking at our water system, including stormwater, because it makes no sense for rainwater to go into a stormwater drain and then get wasted, when in actual fact it should be channeled into a wastewater treatment plant and actually purified. So so you cannot see rainwater harvesting outside of an integrated water resource management plan. Secondly, there's a challenge. Rainwater harvesting, according to the legislation, can only be used for non-potable use, meaning you cannot use it for drinking water. Now, if you don't use it for drinking water, then there's no regulation at a household level to ensure that people are not using it for drinking, which then places a particular challenge for water usage and in terms of the municipality, legislation, people's access, and health-related issues. Then there's the third issue, and this is the main issue from a municipal perspective, if you're talking about commercialization of services and cost recovery. If every single household, noting the rainfall patterns in certain provinces, you have rainwater harvesting tanks, it means that for non-portable use, you will no longer require municipal water. And if you don't require municipal water, it means you have access to water for next to nothing, because God doesn't send you a bill, right? But the municipal revenue is substantively decreases. So we had this massive debate in the early 2000s where the municipalities were threatening households to charge us for rainwater harvesting. And as a civil society activist, my response was, okay, the moment God charges you for the rain, we'll pay. So their argument is some of that water goes into the wastewater, into the waste treatment, and therefore, you know, we can argue in relation to whether you use a meter to measure it, etc., etc. But ultimately, it comes down to revenue. If you take the amount of unaccounted for water produced by water boards that go to municipalities and then runs through the pipe holes, it's unbelievable. It's astronomical in amount. If you just plug holes, right? Not using a cannon to kill a mosquito, meaning put in pressure reduction valves. If you simply plug the holes, I did research in Colesberg, right? Where we simply said to the municipality, let's go and fix leaking toilets, leaking taps, small leaks around meters. We managed to do when you do water from an engineering point of view, you have a water balance. When you do the leakages versus the extraction from the river. So the Harib Dam for the Colesberg municipality, they were drawing 45% more water than what they were entitled to, right? We did with an engineering organization, we showed them by simply closing all the holes, fixing toilet leaks, and replacing washers, they had enough water, even when there was short rainfall. The problem is there's no money for engineers in short-term fixes. You need to do PRVs and blow the system, and then you have water leaks, and it goes on and it goes on and it goes on. So there needs to be a committed understanding that water is a public good. And as much as I agree with you, Prof, that there's definite byproducts from sewage, you don't have to just stop at sewage. The point is it should be a municipal function. It should have regulation with proper standards that need to be regulated. And then the byproduct becomes the revenue for the municipalities to subsidize the services that are given to people. Taking the water, that same water can be processed through a process of reclamation. If you reclaim wastewater, in fact, the reclamation of wastewater is purer, right? Because of the levels of contamination that you're testing, I can tell you that the reclaimed wastewater standards are 1,000 times higher than what you need for drinking water. And for those of you who are cringing and saying, oh my God, well, your current water that you're drinking has a percentage of reclaimed water, is reclaimed, because a proportion of your sewage water is deposited in the very same system from which they draw the water to give you potable water. So please don't think that your clean water is as pure as the water that falls from the sky. So my point is the innovation. I've been in the water sector for more than 30 years. There's enough research. There's enough solutions in relation to how we address this issue. But when you do it from a commercial point of view, and when you add corruption and politics, because people running our municipalities are politicians. Not that I support engineers, but that these engineers know what the hell they're doing. But you cannot make a political decision on an engineering question. And when you make it that kind of a decision, the poor and the working class are the ones that pay, both in relation to water, in fact, in all our municipal services. Thanks.
Thank you, Hamida, for that input. You know, just drawing from your earlier intervention, the issue of commodification. I'd like to pose this to Alex and Neo. I think if we're talking of commodification, and we've got, at least in the South African case, the rising extent of informal settlements who are not doing this willingly. By the way, this is in pursuit of job opportunities around, you know, big metros and so. So what are the options, you know, that are there for those households that, as you indicated now, cannot, and let's move towards the city environment. What will then be the options for those individuals, if you are talking of a commodified system, for those individuals that you know, cannot afford to? If you can just unpack that, Alex and Neo, since you moved into that. Thank you. Anyone first? Yes. Alex?
Yeah, I guess it's a very different situation in the UK in terms of talking about whether we can make extra profit from the waste. Yeah, certainly that does happen. There's plenty that can happen from the heat that's generated from waste that could be turned into electricity. Even the pressure on the system can create electricity as well. The UK has the highest proportion of its waste put back onto farmland in Europe. But that's creating its own issues, because within that sewage sludge, there are a lot of the contaminants. And unfortunately, we don't treat our sewage to a high enough spec. And one of the concerns is, if we did, is that we would actually create more sewage sludge that is more contaminated as well. So there are issues of contaminants. And I'm thinking now of forever chemicals like PFAS, where different countries are looking to do desalination or water recycling. That is probably not as good as we think in terms of getting rid of all PFAS from the water. Something we to be mindful, and that's not something that should be an issue for the water companies. So I think that should be an issue for society, and we just get those chemicals banned and not in our system in the first place.
No, thanks for that. We could be creating, you know, a new problem. I mean, it's already there with the forever chemicals, but you know, if we're going that way, we are opening the high extent on that. You know, we are nearing the end of our discussion now, but now I just want to go back to you again. What then will be the options for people who cannot afford to pay those tariffs because they are poor, unemployed, and so forth? What would you comment? What has been the observations based on your work? Do those people then not access any or get any water access and sanitation services just because they cannot pay?
Can you please repeat? Sorry, Chair, I got a bit distracted. Can you please repeat the question?
So just a quick one. For those citizens that cannot afford to pay, does that mean then that they get cut off onto, accessing water and sanitation services? And if you can just briefly respond to that, because we have actually run out of time.
No, Chair, will not only being unkind to cut off, but will also be, committing one of the greatest sin to deny people a basic service of water. I think given the legislative framework that Azara spoke about, we can simply agree that there are serious loopholes in as far as status of water security is concerned, both in South Africa and globally. But we can't say we need to cut off people who are unemployed. Maybe we need to maximize the issue of subsidies, look into the issue of the indigent register, to find ways in as far as trying to assist those who can't afford. But to cut people off from the grid or to deny people an opportunity to have water, it's a totally no, actually. Thank you.
No, thanks on that. I was just trying to get insights, what do they face? Because they do need water, but what circumstances actually happen or unfold just because they cannot, they cannot pay. Colleagues, I am experiencing challenges with my system now, but noting that we've run out of time, Professor O, I would like to draw you to the platform now in respect of time. Coming from the University of the Free State as the Dean of Science, Agriculture and Natural Sciences, but he's also a member. So today he is actually a host of this engagement that we are having today. Prof, if you can just draw for us some summarize and key takeaway messages as we close.
Thank you, Chair, and colleagues. Thanks for this webinar. I think it's very interesting, and I don't think we will solve the problems within an hour or so. But I summarized, and I will try to summarize what I did see out of this discussion. So, and it was also for me very interesting. I mean, Prof Ford, coming from the UK specifically, it just shows that we're not alone with our challenges. And I think that's also important. We always think it's only Africa, and it isn't. So what I summarized, I'm going to mention a few of the highlights of this webinar. And I'll start off with what we heard. What we heard, make it clear that water is not just a service, but it's a very foundation of our country's growth, health and well-being. I mean, that comes in ecosystems, that comes very strong through these presentations. The discussions also highlighted both the urgency and the complexity of securing sustainable water and sanitation services in South Africa. Then we also see our municipalities continues to face immense challenges in balancing financial sustainability with equitable access. The inputs shared and underscored the structural barriers of weak revenue collection, deterioration of infrastructure, and poverty, but also point to us towards a practical strategy and strengthening your municipality finance system. It comes very clearly through investing in capacity and infrastructure, as many of the speakers said, and ensuring that, I think, most importantly, that Ms. Ahmed mentioned there, is ensuring as a free basic service remains a safety net for the most vulnerable without undermining long-term viability. So that will also tell us that we reminded the whole situation that addressing these challenges requires not only technical solutions, as been mentioned, or biological solutions, but also the participation across government, academics, civil society, and in the community. And that's in a nutshell, Chair, that I could summarize for you what I heard this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Oberosta, for those remarks. Because we are recording, we really would like to get this synopsis influencing the agenda of the Academy of Science of South Africa, particularly on the issues of water and sanitation. We've come to the end of our webinar, colleagues. I would really like to start by thanking you, all the participants, for spending your time with us today. We really welcome your involvement in today's session, and we really are also looking forward to occasions of this nature, growing more and more in partnership with others as well. The Academy is open to partnerships to engage on such matters forward. So please do approach us should such opportunities and need arise in the future. I would also like to thank all our speakers, for today's webinar. ASSAf from City of Fane. We had Amida representing the labor force and really sharing some good insights there, as well as some research perspectives coming from NEWA as well as the UK from Alex. We really appreciate your insights, colleagues, and please be ensured that this is not the end of our engagement. Your insights shared today will really infuse into the agenda of the Water and Sanitation Forum, which Professor Kloete and Professor Oberosta are custodians of. So going forward, some of these will definitely be considered into the work of the forum. I'd also like to thank my hosts, my colleagues, Rudzani, Kuzo, as well as Raj, for organizing today's webinar. Without all your engagements and planning with the speakers, we really wouldn't have had today's session. Colleagues, we've just run a bit over time, but I would really like to thank you and also indicate that we will be sharing the link to the webinar, to the recording of the webinar, as well as the presentations that were shared, that were presented in today's webinar. And with that, colleagues, I would like to thank you, and we bring this webinar to a close and wish you a good afternoon and a good evening going forward. Thank you.